The story of how we made Cyclical really needs to start at the end of the credits with the team. I planned to go in and give everybody a description of the title and the job that they performed, but that really proved impossible without getting ridiculous, because everybody on a no-budget film shoot does every job.
Audio rolling.
David Burton was instrumental in capturing the audio that we needed, but even he shows up on camera at one point in time. So do you credit him as both an extra and the sound guy? I don't know. Jonathan Grease was there for the very first shoot day as my camera operator because I was in the film, and so I wasn't going to be able to actually run the camera and be in the scene. But then after that, he was busy with other things while we were shooting the other days, and so I was camera opping at that point in time. So is he really the camera operator? Well, for that day he was. But then at the end of the shoot, he comes in and he's, you know, the guy dancing around in the club scene. Is he an extra, an actor? Like, what is this guy? And so that's where I eventually had to just say, you know what? Because so many people did so many different jobs that were so important to making this film happen, I just have to credit the team. I really pride myself on being an independent filmmaker, making movies on my own, and that's just, it's just not true. It's not possible. You cannot make films by yourself. I'm working on this behind the scenes by myself. I have the camera set up and watching it on my computer screen over here. But this is behind the scenes. For a film with actors and locations, you really need to have a giant team behind you. And my wife has produced for me in the past. She's been the one to help me bring my films into existence. And this time she said, Luke, you're really getting to the point where your projects are big enough that you need people beyond just the people that you know. And so Brittany decided to actually back out of this film to push me to try and connect with more filmmakers in the area. That proved difficult and frustrating. I think this was probably one of the hardest projects I've ever done due to the fact that there was so much in this particular production. 2 years ago, my short film had one location. A year ago, my short film had one location. This particular film, when I first broke down the script, had 26 unique locations. Cyclical was definitely an ambitious project for me. I was pushing myself with this script. 3 actors, okay, I've worked with many in the past, and that works out really well, but 26 locations in the script, that's crazy. I also had a whole lot more in my film. It's no longer just people sitting around talking or picking up soda bottles or anything like that. This is people driving expensive cars. This is having a club scene. This is a film with smoking and partying and people moving into different locations. It was a big project with a lot going on in it. And the biggest part of that, the biggest contributor to that particular element, is the number of montages that I have in my script. In fact, even when I don't say this is a montage, there are scenes where it's a montage. I'm trying to cover a lot of a person's story, and so I'm jumping through time throughout this project, and so we're jumping through locations. We drive somewhere, grab a shot, and then drive somewhere else. It required a lot more work to find locations, to find people to be in those locations, to find props to fill those locations. And so it really was a bigger project than something I had done in the past. There's this weird dynamic that happens when you're working on a film. When you need people, when you need extras to fill a club scene, for instance, nobody's available. But when you're just talking about your movie and trying to get it made, suddenly everybody wants to be involved. I had several people say, oh man, can I come hang out with you guys and see what it is? Or, wow, I've got this skill, can you use it in your film? And I really love knowing people who have these skills, but I didn't need them. And so there's kind of this awkward, like, sure, yeah, you can send me your content or you can show up. And thankfully, we didn't have too many people just show up randomly on set, so we were able to just keep moving and there wasn't anything weird with that. But it is odd to just have that exuberance for making movies that people show. And so there's something really cool about it, but it's also kind of weird and kind of frustrating and odd. And at one point in time, I was talking at lunch with some of my coworkers about, the film and what I was doing, and Allie was like, I'll do some storyboards for you. Okay. And so we got together and she asked all these really good questions, like, so what do you need these storyboards to look like? And I was like, well, I really liked the advice from one behind the scenes that I watched that said that the storyboards should be less detailed so that you have more flexibility in your shooting. It just gives you the feel and the idea of the scene. And she was like, okay, that's a great idea. Do you need anything else? What else are you going to do with these? And I was like, honestly, before we chatted, I wasn't planning on having storyboards, so just make them. We sat down for a couple hours and she sketched out a whole bunch of really cool stuff. But how useful was it for me? I don't know. But it's cool to now have some experience working with a storyboard artist and to think about how to use that in the future. So when people present stuff, it's a really good idea not to burn bridges and to invite people in and encourage them to be part of your production in whatever little capacity they can, so that you get a feel not only for what it's like to work with that particular skill set and tools, but also so that you have those resources in the future and those friendships and those connections for when you need to do something more advanced in your next project. When I got to talking about music, my main actor, Daniel, came in and said, it's really something that really makes me excited and is my passion, so could I do some music and see if they'll work for your film? Sure. We got together, we recorded some stuff just onto my Tascam, and then used two different microphones. I had both my shotgun and my cardioid, because I didn't know which would pick it up better. I ended up going with the shotgun, I think, as far as audio, although the cardioid was just fine as well, sticking it right next to the strings. It was really cool to just have this original music that my lead actor had created in the background of the film, and I think it really added some nice flavor to the film because of that. The rest of the music is just from some royalty-free music that I've purchased over the years, and I really feel like that helped just fill out the scenes, especially the club scene where I needed some really much more bouncy and techno-y type music. Every project has its massive problems that you run into. For Cyclical, the first biggest problem was 2 days before filming, I got a call from my lead actress who said, there's been a family emergency and I'm so sorry, but I have to bow out of your film. So, okay, I mean, obviously you have to go do what you have to do, and I'm really sorry, and if there's anything I can do to help, but what am I gonna do? And that's where you start to feel really terrible as a filmmaker, because you really care about people and you really want to help, but I've got a movie I have to make. So then I was running errands with Allie, who was going to be Rex, the other actress in my film, and she was texting one of her friends, and then in the middle of the conversation, she was like, wait a minute, do you want to be in Luke's film? Do you want to be an actress? And Megan was like, well, the only acting I've done is in this, little high school project that I was in, and it was terrible, so I don't think you want me. And I was like, well, I don't have an actress without you, so I want you. And I've had such success working with non-actors. I was really confident that Megan was going to be able to pull this off. From the very first shot, it was very evident that we'd made a great choice, and that the team that we had assembled for this project was just going to be top-notch and stellar. I'm no longer in film school, and so all of my actors and everybody that I want to work with have real jobs that actually pay them money, and that's why this particular production stretched out over so many days. We had 4 hours here, we had a Saturday morning this day, and it wasn't something where we're going to get together and shoot for 18 hours. It was, we're going to get together and shoot for a couple hours, and then I'll see you in a couple of days. This actually worked out really well with editing, because that meant that I would shoot for an evening, and then I'd pull it into my timeline the next day, cut it all together, and then meet up the following day to shoot some more. And so there was kind of a rhythm as far as producing and then post, and then back to producing again, and then post again. So it really worked out well, but it did stretch out the production a lot longer than would be typical, especially based off of my last two experiences of shooting everything in just a day or in a few hours. Day one of shooting, we'd finished up at the park, and I called the dispensary location, said, okay, we're ready to come over, are you ready to have us? And the guy said, oh man, I just talked with my partner, and he's totally not okay with you guys coming and filming here. So we were down a location, and unfortunately this wasn't just a location where we could change this to a back alley or something, as some of my actors suggested. So we had to find another location, and that took me another 2 weeks before I was able to find a replacement location for the one that we just had. The other really difficult location was the club scene. I contacted a few clubs, and all of them said, "We don't want you to bother people," or whatever. I totally understand that, especially as a guy who has a zero budget, not being a big name on YouTube. I have nothing to offer you guys. So what are we going to do instead? So I purchased a couple of lights and got into a friend's basement. Unfortunately, I had to find a few more extras to be able to fill that space. I contacted everybody that I knew. I texted, I sent out messages. I had people share those messages. I got 0 bites. You have to find a date and say, we're going to film this date. So my location says yes, my actors say yes, and the extras just aren't there. It worked out. We got it to work, and honestly, I think shooting in a club would have been more difficult. The audio would have been insane. Clubs are just packed wall to wall. We wouldn't have been able to move around and get the shots that we needed. But it was still a major bummer because I wanted to bring this film to a new level of production value, and I felt that shooting in a club with just a sea of people was going to be a way to really do that. But for now, we're just working with the 7 people that we had milling around in the shop. I made the purposeful choice, as I looked at production for this film, to not include a lot of technology. We had the camera and a tripod, and then I also used a couple of my homemade stabilizers, but I didn't do any lights. We had just the single microphone, and actually I plugged it into a new device that I have now that allows me to record external audio. This production was really low-key, very, very small crew was necessary for most of this. But it really worked out well because it meant that we could move faster and work better and smarter with what we had. And honestly, for not having any lights or bounce cards or anything like that, I feel like the footage really turned out quite well. We needed a few props for Cyclical, particularly related to the drugs and alcohol. The marijuana actually proved to be pretty easy to fabricate. I looked up some pictures of marijuana and some pictures of alfalfa and was like, yeah, that's gonna work. So I went and I purchased an entire bale of alfalfa, which we were gonna give to the chickens anyway, and then my wife pulled out some pieces, used some glue, and then stuck it all together into some somewhat shaped marijuana type plants alfalfa glue combinations, and we put that in a plastic baggie, and it looks okay. And that's really the important part of props is does it work? Does it look okay enough that it's going to play on camera? In this case, I think it really did. The other big piece that we needed was alcohol, and everything has printing and labels all over it, so I ended up just spray painting the box with red spray paint and then dabbing the caps also with the red spray paint that I just sprayed into a plastic baggie and then rubbed on the top. And some people on the set were like, I didn't even know you could buy alcohol with just red labels. So I knew at that point in time that that really had worked. Before the shoot, I just started collecting bottles, and then I just stick them in the sink and soak off the labels, so I had a large box full of alcoholic glass bottles that we could use in the shoot. And really that just comes down to thinking about what you're going to need beforehand, so you're not rushing around the day of trying to make stuff work. The wad of cash that John gives to Rex was just a 20 and then stuffed with a whole bunch of ones. I think I calculated it correctly so that if the ones inside had actually been 20s, it would have been $1,000, which fits with his line where he says,
if you hand a girl $1,000 and she can't part with 10, she has to know there's a problem.
I thought that was kind of fun and totally, completely pointless other than just go me.
I guess I walked into that.
Yeah.
A couple weeks before filming started, I had made myself some oatmeal for breakfast, and I noticed the consistency of this oatmeal, and I was like, this is amazing, and my actors need to get dirty for one of the scenes, so wouldn't it be cool if I just mixed up some oatmeal and then kind of smeared it on them to get this globby, dirty look. And so we made some, and they even ended up rolling in the mud and getting each other dirty, and the oatmeal doesn't really show up on camera, but it's there, and that's the part that matters.
That was great.
Yeah.
A couple days before the changing room scene in the bathroom, I was like, you know what would be really cool is if Rex had a tramp stamp. I brought it up to her, and she was like, okay, yeah, that sounds like a cool idea. And so I was like, well, do we know any artists who can come and do this during this time? And she was like, well, I'm actually bringing over Michaela, one of my artist friends. And Michaela was like, yeah, that sounds like so much fun. Honestly, I think that's one of the things that we as filmmakers need to be aware of and to think about as we go into productions, because it's so odd to be able to write a line like, you know, the character's muddy, you know, enter the scene, or the girls are changing, and you can just write these lines, and then your actors go and roll around in the mud, or, you know, zip off the dress. Like it's, there's this crazy power with that, and there is so much responsibility that you have as a filmmaker to make certain that you do not exploit your actors. It's also very humbling and sobering with the amount of responsibility that you have to take care of the people that have entrusted themselves to you and to the film that you're making. While we were on set, we even got to talking about this, because there are scenes in movies where I really honestly believe the director was just like, you know what? I think I could get away with this because people are going to do what I say. And that's just wrong. You shouldn't do that. So as you make films, as you work on productions, keep a careful eye on how you're treating people, how they are responding to you, and then also what you're doing and your motivations for doing those things. I wanted Cyclical to feel like a more expensive film than it was. And one way to do that was to just have these little moments in the montages that felt more expensive. I was really grateful that a local food bank allowed us to come in and fill bags. That was a lot of fun because I'd never actually done that, and neither had my actors, and so it was cool to just see them working in there, and I just wandered around with my camera and shot them filling up these bags. So that was really cool because it just added an expanse to the film. Another thing that I was able to do was rip up my back deck. I'm going to have my windows egressed in my basement, and so that deck needed to go anyway. So I was like, you know, this works out really well because I need to tear up my deck. Why don't I just tear up my deck for my movie and just make it look bigger than it was? Because I was originally just going to have them do yard work. But, you know, putting a stick in a shovel in the dirt, just whatever. But tearing up a deck, that is big. And I think that adds a little bit to the expansiveness of the film and of the world. So if there's ways that you can even just slip in things into your productions just to give it a little more body, that really helps sell the film, even if nobody watching the film notices that that's what you've done. With this film, I finally got to fulfill one of the dreams and goals that I had for filmmaking in one of the props for this film, and that is when we got the Audi vehicle. I have long thought that they were really cool looking cars, and every time that I wrote a script where I needed a cool looking car, I always envisioned the really expensive, cool person being in an Audi. So as I was going through pre-production and looking at the props and the places and the elements that I would need, I was like, you know, I'd really love to have an Audi for this film. And Jess was like, well, I work for this lady and she has an Audi and she lets me drive it all the time to run errands, so maybe she'll let me drive that in your film. And I was like, yeah! And so I have this beautiful opening shot with this beautiful car, and I was so stoked about having an Audi, so I recorded a bunch of footage and I took lots of pictures. Megan was really into character with her homeless persona, so she's standing in the background with her cardboard sign, and it was hilarious, it was a ton of fun, and it was really cool to be able to shoot with a car that's way more expensive than my own. This production, of course, doesn't feel like a special effects movie. The practical effects were the skinned knee that my wife put on my niece and smoking. I looked into various options as to what we could use for that, and ultimately, my main actor said, you know what, I'm just going to go get an e-cig that doesn't have any nicotine in it, and for $5, that was a fantastic effect that we could use in our film. My hope is that you didn't even notice the one and only digital effect in this film, and that is of the cell phone when she finally decides to call Rex instead of John and clicks on that. What really pulled across the screen was my actress's actual phone number, and so I just created this slide-over graphic that I could just push over on top of that. The phone icon is actually a photo of a rotary phone headset that I own. I might actually just make that icon available public domain for people, so yeah, I think I'm just going to throw that in there as another tool that you can use in your productions if it helps you. While there aren't any other visual effects in the film, I did have to do quite a lot of visual cleanup in a few places. For the what, you smoke a lot of weed scene. As they're walking past the dumpster, there of course is a giant logo on the side. And so what I had to do was paint it out by hand in GIMP, frame by frame, and then bring that back into the system. And there's the shot of him as he's standing there at the very end, and there's a little flash of green off to the side, and that's actually my sound man's shoulder. I'll probably leave it in just because it's funny, although every once in a while it distracts me as I watch it. Then other times I don't even notice it, so it'll probably just stay in and I won't bother with trying to paint him out. I had a goal in production to have more establishing shots and room tone. Establishing shots are these brief little moments with very little camera motion that sets the stage for where your characters are that you're going to cut to next. So an exterior of an apartment lets us know that when we cut into two girls in a room, that room is in that apartment. Without that, your film really feels disjointed and you're just kind of flipping through worlds. One of the establishing shots that I wanted was of a really nice, big, expensive-looking house for when Rex and Izzy are in the bathroom changing, setting up that that is John and this is his lifestyle, this is what he's got. I couldn't find a good-looking house. I ended up just using a shot that I had grabbed while in the really expensive, nice house that we were in. I think it works. It flows by me now, and I'm okay with it, but it's still not an establishing shot. And I didn't get enough room tone. What you can do is you can cut together your scene, and if you need to leave a gap, there's just this sound. Establishing shots and room tone, they'll really help your film. I have people over to my house all the time, and so I get to hear a lot of people's life stories and the craziness that happens just in everyday life. One day this girl came over and she started telling me her life story, and it wasn't at the normal level, like it was a whole new level of crazy. The more I thought about it, the more I was like, man, this story, I should make a movie about it. Because we are all in desperate need of grace. Some people were like, well, why did you cast yourself as Luke in the film? Well, one reason is because it truly was easier to just not try and find another actor and just do it myself. Another big part of it is because that character resonates, and this film is an exploration for me as well about what it's like to go through those cycles of doing well and then crashing and burning again. What is it like to fall off the wagon? And then what do we do about it? I believe that there is someone who is calling us and saying, hey, let's hang out. Let's do this. I wanted Cyclical to be true to the original life story that I was building this film off of. And so a lesbian subtext was actually really important to me. And I wanted to show more of this life than just, you know, a sexual orientation thing. This is a story about hurt and loss. And it doesn't matter if you're gay, straight, transgender, whatever, you and I have all experienced that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I made a serious mistake while writing this script, so that the idea of this homoerotic subtext just completely fell apart. Rex and I were talking, and she said, this whole homoerotic thing is kind of weird to me because Izzy's my sister. I was like, wait, what? Where do you get that Izzy is your sister? And she says it at the park. John says, is your sister selfish? And she says, yeah. I was like, that's talking about her actual sister. And she's like, what are you talking about? In my mind, when John is sitting there and asks, do you love anyone, Izzy? And she says, yes, my sister. She's thinking about a person totally separate from Rex. It's not Rex. Rex is the ambiguous relationship stuff. The sister is somebody else entirely. I was trying to draw a connection between this other person who is selfish and then weave back to Rex being selfish so that Izzy could see this connection. And yeah, that was way too subtle. I was doing way too many things with just a couple words, and I completely confused my actors, so I'm sure I confused my audience, and so I was like, okay, fine. They are not this ambiguous lesbian lovers thing. They are actually sisters. And my wife said, well, Luke, that's actually good for you. Because when Rex comes and says, we need to get drunk, she actually has more of a draw because it's family, it's blood, it's sister. And I was like, okay, so my script's actually better for my mess up. But I probably should have made it so that Instead of saying, do you love anybody? And Izzy says, my sister more than anyone. She should have said, my brother more than anyone. Because that would have kept the separation between this character that she was talking about and Rex, who's actually in the movie. That separation was important to me as I was writing because I wanted to, again, expand the world that I was creating. And one of the things I've observed, and I want to learn how to do, is have characters talk about what's going on by talking about something else that has already gone on in their lives that's not part of the movie, that's not part of the story. I've seen this happen in other films, and I wrote a blog post about it in the film Kissing Jessica Stein. There's this brilliant scene where they're talking about something else entirely that is exactly about this thing. I think there's also really good stuff about that in Fruits Basket, in my favorite episode with Kisa. And I was trying to do that with this sister thing, and I failed. And that is kind of sad. But means I get to try again, I guess, or something. Isn't that the theme of my movie? I don't... What? There's a point in writing where it's working on the page, but then when you get to the set, it just starts to sound strange, inaccurate, or in this case, downright creepy. That's probably the worst one.
As you can see, you just start critiquing everything you've done. You don't know the solution yet, so you just start trying to play it different ways.
That's the reality, is that you actually are trying to check up on it.
No, totally.
You're trying to, okay,
Maybe,
why...
maybe just say I'm checking up on you.
No, because that's still bad. So instead of
it's really hard to make this not creepy.
So how about we say, you doing okay? But that... No, clearly, I'm being followed by a guy.
Creepy dude.
I'm not okay. Nothing was really working, and that's when Jonathan made a really good point, and he said...
I think you just have to play it. I think you have to play it the way you wrote. You gotta commit.
So we tried it, and honestly, it worked out okay. But there were several places in the film where, while we were filming, the cast and crew and even myself felt like, wow, this really isn't going to work. This is inappropriate, and it's not really going to play. And then when we actually got to sit down and watch the cut, it all worked out okay. There is a good truth to just sitting down and trusting what you've written. And if you need to learn something from that, you will for your next production. But sometimes you just have to push through the uncertainty on set and just go for it. I found out while we were on set shooting the very first scene of the car driving up, and he says, I'm not that kind of guy, and she says, what, a John? That my actress had no idea what a John was. My lead actor is trying to explain this. And so I guess there's always chances to learn more, and that was truly the case for me as I wrote the script, because I'm trying to write worlds that I really don't know much about. And so I had originally written that the girls are at a rave. When Rex comes over and she's trying on different costumes for me, she's like, this is rave gear, and she has fancy little gloves and this gas mask thing, and I'm like, what is that? That's not what I'm looking. I'm looking for like short skirt and stupid cute and stuff. And she's like, oh, you don't mean rave then. You wrote rave. That's wrong. What you're talking about is a club. And I was like, okay. And so I went in and I changed that in the script because, no, it's not a rave. It's a club. When John first says, we together go out, help the hurting, change the world, I wanted to then go into a whole bunch of shots where they were actually helping the hurting, changing the world. And I didn't get nearly as many as I wanted. The big one that I was hoping to get was the two characters singing at a retirement home. That is a group of people who are hurting and really, I think, would do well from just some young whippersnappers getting together with them. I tried to call a retirement home and they didn't get back to me. I contacted the retirement group at my church and they couldn't pull anything together for me, and so ultimately I just had them sit down in front of a tree and play a song, and it doesn't have nearly the depth or the expansive world that I had in mind when I wrote my original script. One of my favorite parts of directing Cyclical came when we were driving from one location to the next, and we were talking over the lines that we were going to do in the next scene. And as the actors read their lines back and forth to each other to try and find a rhythm, there were several places where I just said, okay, stop. You're just saying these lines because I wrote them on the page, but there's so much more going on behind the scenes within these words that you're saying. And so it was really rewarding for me as the writer-director to be able to stop and say, when I wrote this line and when your character says this, you're actually thinking this. You're talking about this element. You're hearkening back to this element and space where you were. And so it actually gave a depth to the film, and it reminded me that I actually kind of knew what I was doing a little bit when I wrote this script. And so it was fun to be the director-writer at that moment, talking through some lines that I felt really did work, unlike the ones that were kind of creepy the day before. I kept saying throughout this project that this is a zero-budget film, and it truly was. I had $0 allocated to making this movie, but I knew it would cost money. And this time I decided, you know what, I'm just going to tally up how much this film ended up costing me. And this is just money that I spent to get this project put together. This isn't the money that my actors had to spend to drive someplace with the gas costs and all that. This wasn't the price of any of the equipment that I already own. This isn't the price of any of the other stuff that people brought to this film, including costumes and things like that. So this is truly just the dollar amount that it takes to feed people, get the props that you need, and put this whole thing together. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that this has given you some ideas and encouragement as you work on your own productions. And if you're interested in learning more about editing, I'm planning on taking this film and turning it into an editing course. So be sure to watch for that here on Production-Now.com.